Tony Benn.
Genuine and widespread support for their campaign in this country. And if that message goes back, then this meeting will done good not only in shifting British opinion, but in shifting opinion in Egypt as well. For my part, I've been, as I'm sure we all have, very inspired by the news we've had from Egypt and from Tunis and from Libya and news of it in Bahrain and elsewhere, because what we are witnessing is the oldest campaign of all in human history, the campaign of people to govern themselves. It's a basic democratic argument, and if you look at democracy, it is based on the principle not of the sovereignty of Parliament, but the sovereignty of the people, who then elect the Parliament that governs and can be removed by the people and replaced. And that is what the whole thing is about. And in the case of Egypt, apart from the domestic aspects, the fact they've been under a dictator, with repression and torture and imprisonment and so on, there's also the international dimension. Because if you look at the history of Egypt, which is one of the most ancient civilizations in the world, and the mother of our own civilization in many ways, if you look at Egypt, Egypt has almost always been under foreign control. It was a part of the Byzantine Empire, governed by the Turks. The Greeks were there. Napoleon moved into Egypt in 1798 or whenever it was, 200 years ago, and of course after that in 1865 Britain went into Egypt on the grounds that there'd been some default on the arrangements for the financing of the Suez Canal Company. And British troops remained in Egypt from 1865 right up to 1955. I was there as a young RAF pilot in 1945, and I remember on a train between Cairo and Alexandria, an old Egyptian said to me, "You should get out of Egypt." And I said, "I agree with you," and he was a bit surprised. The British controlled Egypt, and then when finally we did withdraw in 55, a year later the plot was organised with the Israelis to make war on Egypt, a completely fraudulent campaign, and the Egyptians fought, and in this country many people supported it. We had huge demonstrations in Trafalgar Square against the Suez War, and then of course the Americans had come in subsequently. They put a lot of money into the Egyptian army, and they hoped to influence, and did succeed in influencing Egypt in its attitude towards the Palestinian movement. And I thought when George went through to Gaza and he had a job getting through the Egyptian border, I thought how many of them remember the battle we put up to support Egypt when they were attacked by us in 56. And therefore this is also a campaign for Egypt and the Egyptian people to determine their own future and their own foreign policy. Because in a way it's not the dominant consideration, but it is a very important consideration, because the Arab world has been dominated by the West for so long that the people there don't really feel, many of them, that they've had any say in contributing towards the problem of Palestinian independence or any other example of independence you may pick. So this is a very broad movement. It's about domestic democracy, it's about an end to repression, it's about the right to elections, it's about the right to a government you choose, it's also a right to decide what foreign policy the country of which you belong follows. And that's why support from Britain today, I hope, will make some impact on those who hear about it. We're a big meeting called at short notice, but I think we do represent the overwhelming majority of people in Britain. And when you read about the plans the government are thinking about to intervene in Libya with a no-fly zone, which would be a military attack upon Libya, you realise the dangers that could be followed if we didn't adopt the basic principle that the Egyptians must decide their future, and it mustn't be decided in Washington or London or Europe or anywhere else. And that is the heart of the argument, and that is why the Egyptian people demand our support and need it and are tonight receiving it. And there are so many possibilities lying ahead, not only for the Egyptian people themselves. The military have been sympathetic to the Egyptian people and have now taken over temporarily, but we don't want it to end with the military government. We want the military to make possible a democratic government, and we want to be sure it isn't made an excuse for some foreign occupation afterwards. So there's a great deal going on in Egypt that directly affects us in Britain and affects the other countries neighbouring to Egypt who could look to Egypt and do look to Egypt to give leadership to the Arab world. And this is a very big event, and revolutions can sometimes be prevented from operating by external pressure. If you think of the revolutions in our history, how many of them have led to foreign intervention, which has led to tension and hostility and war, and we have an opportunity to take a totally different attitude of supporting the Egyptian people in what they want, and see we give them such backing as it's open to us to give. So thank you for coming, and good luck.